Hi, fifth graders, it's Miss Perlman. I hope you all had a wonderful spring break. I am going to do your reading mini lesson with you today, and I hope you enjoy. So we're going to start by watching a video clip. And as you watch this video clip, I want you to think about what genre does this video clip portray?
Did you ever make anything happen? Anything you couldn't explain? You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what? Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry.
In a few moments you will pass.
Readers, if you were thinking that the genre was fantasy, you are absolutely right. And today is the day that we are going to start our unit of study in fantasy. Some of you may already be very avid fantasy readers, and others of you might be a little unsure about it, or it's not a genre you have been interested in. But we're going to begin by thinking about why we would read fantasy. And here are a few reasons. Reason one, because the stories are incredible. There are wild, dangerous, romantic tales where the fate of mankind may rest on the choices made by the main character. Everything is more important, more intense, more vivid in fantasy stories. Reason two is because when you study fantasy, really you're studying the human condition. The stories are never really about elves and hobbits. They're actually more about the struggle between good and evil. They're about how power corrupts, and they're about the quest to be better than we are. They're even about how the smallest of us can affect what happens in this world. And the last reason I'm going to share with you today is because if you become a powerful reader of fantasy, you're really likely to become a more powerful reader of all kinds of texts. Fantasy novels are very complicated, and you have to figure out where the story takes place, what kind of world that is, who has the power there, what the rules are, and you're going to realize that the characters in these stories change, and things are really, really complicated. And so readers, today what I want to teach you is that as fantasy readers, your very first task will be to figure out not just where your story happens, but also what kind of place it is. And one way you can do this work is to investigate clues about the time period and important magical elements using the cover, the blurbs, and details from the very beginning of the story in order to do this research. And if you're an experienced fantasy reader, you'll expect certain kinds of settings to appear in the books that you read. So often fantasy stories are set in medieval worlds, full of swords and horses and castles and dragons and so forth, kind of like in Lord of the Rings or in Narnia. And then a second common setting is a futuristic world, very different and often troubled than the world that we live in. And this is similar to what you may have seen or read about in the Hunger Games. And another common setting is an ordinary world where it seems at first as if everything is normal, but then gradually you notice that there's magic and there is this blending of the world we know with magical elements. And that is similar to what we see in Harry Potter. So when you're reading fantasy books, you want to make sure that from the very first moment, you're being really alert to the kind of place that your story is taking place. And it's important to get oriented to this very quickly in fantasy books because things happen really quickly in fantasy. And so we are going to start by taking a look at this book, The Paperback Princess. You may have seen it before. And we are going to, let me get the cover for you. We are going to start by taking a look at the cover of The Paperback Princess. And I'm not even looking at the pages yet. I know that I can get a lot of information from the cover. And so I can see from this cover right here that the book is called The Paperback Princess, and there's a girl with a bent crown and a huge castle-like door and a gigantic smoking dragon on the front cover. And then if I flip to the back, there's that same dragon, that gigantic dragon, who is breathing fire over the girl's head. And unfortunately, in this book, there's actually no blurb on the back. There's nothing really telling me anything about the book. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and open it up. So I am going to read the first page to you while you are looking at the image, the illustration. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. And so I see here that there's a picture of a snotty-looking prince. His nose is in the air, and then there's a girl who's staring at him with hearts flying around her. And the room looks like a castle with arched windows and stone walls and old wooden chairs. And their clothes are definitely medieval. That's like from the Middle Ages. And so I definitely see from the furniture and the buildings and the clothes that this story happens in a place that is medieval. Now I'm going to keep reading a little bit more. Again, I'm going to show you the picture while I read. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. And so now I'm seeing that there is magic here too. This is not historical fiction about the Middle Ages. It's a dragon has entered. It's definitely a magical creature, and he even has magically managed to smash Elizabeth's castle and burn all of Elizabeth's clothes without harming her at all. Okay, readers, so I think I know enough now, but what matters is that I've learned about this time and place in this story, and I'm getting a sense of what kind of place this is. It's pretty clear that the story begins in a medieval place. It has castles and old-fashioned clothes and princesses, and it's definitely magical. It has dragons. There's no subways or buses or laser guns or spacecraft, and the story started right away in this magical kingdom. And the reason I know this is because I considered the pictures and the text on the cover and the clues about daily life and the appearance of any magic. And it's also, though, a place of sudden violence where people's lives are ripped apart and they can find themselves alone, facing horrible challenges without any support. It's a land that kind of seems nice and charming at first, but it seems to be turning out to be unsafe. And so we are becoming what is called sophisticated readers of fantasy. We've started by researching this setting, and we have some really good ideas about what the setting is like, the time and the place, and what kind of place it is. And we also want to think about who might have power and what kind of power do they have, along with what's some evidence from what we've researched so far that proves what we're thinking. So if I'm thinking about the Paperback Princess, it seems as though, I guess, the dragon has power. That seems to be someone who, or not someone, a character who has power. I think that maybe the prince has some power. He seems to have some sort of power in a way over the princess, over Elizabeth. So I'm not really sure, but those are the characters I'm thinking might have power so far. Okay, readers, now you're going to have the opportunity to try some of this work yourself. So I'm going to introduce to you this new read aloud that all of 5th grade is going to be reading. I'm going to start it with you today, but only read a little bit of it. And your teacher, your reading teacher, is going to be reading the majority of the book to you. I'm just going to start it with you today. So as we are starting this book, we want to research the setting right away. And we're going to do that by looking at the cover. We're also going to read the back blurb. And we're also going to read the beginning of the book. And so as I am reading to you today, I want you to be considering what kind of place is this? And I also want you to consider that other question which we talked about, which is who has power? What kind of power do they have? And what evidence do you have of that. So you should have your journal out, and you should be starting by looking at the cover of the book and jotting down anything at all that you notice about the setting, about the time and place, based on what you see on the cover. And as you are jotting that down, I'm also going to go ahead and read the back blurb to you. Mr. Hood's holiday house has stood for 1,000 years, welcoming countless children into its embrace. It is a place of miracles where every childhood whim may be satisfied. There is a price to be paid, of course, but young Harvey Swick, bored with his life and beguiled by Mr. Wood's wonders, does not stop to consider the consequences. It is only when the house shows its darker face, when Harvey discovers the pitiful creatures that dwell in its shadows, that he comes to doubt Mr. Hood's philanthropy. But the house and its mysterious architect are not about to release their captive without a battle. Mr. Hood has ambitions for his new guest, for Harvey's soul burns brighter than any he has encountered in 10 centuries. Now we're going to go ahead and actually start reading some of the book. Hopefully you already have some things jotted down. Feel free to pause the video if you want to get your thoughts together, and then come back to listen to the beginning of the book. I'm going to start by also showing you some images along the way that are in the book in the beginning. So here's one of them. This might give you some clues about the setting. It also might give you some clues about who has power and what kind of power. And I'm going to show you one more picture before I start the first chapter. Okay, let's read. Chapter 1, Harvey Half Devoured. The great gray beast February had eaten Harvey Swick alive. Here he was buried in the belly of that smothering month, wondering if he would ever find his way out through the cold coils that lay between here and Easter. He didn't think much of his chances. More than likely he'd become so bored as the hours crawled by that one day he'd simply forget to breathe. Then maybe people would get to wondering why such a fine young lad had perished in his prime. It would become a celebrated mystery which wouldn't be solved until some great detective decided to recreate a day in Harvey's life. Then, and only then, would the grim truth be discovered. The detective would first follow Harvey's route to school every morning, trekking through the dismal streets. Then he'd sit at Harvey's desk and listen to the pitiful drone of the history teacher and the science teacher and wonder how the heroic boy had managed to keep his eyes open. And finally, as the wasted day dwindled to dusk, he'd trace the homeward trek, and as he set foot on the step from which he had departed that morning, and people asked him, as they would, why such a sweet soul as Harvey had died, he would shake his head and say, "It's very simple." "Oh," the curious crowd would say, "do tell." And brushing away a tear, the detective would reply, "Harvey Swick was eaten by the great gray beast, February." It was a monstrous month, that was for sure. A dire and dreary month. The pleasures of Christmas, both sharp and sweet, were already dimming in Harvey's memory, and the promise of summer was so remote as to be mythical. There'd be a spring break, of course, but how far off was that? 5 weeks? 6? Mathematics wasn't his strong point, so he didn't irritate himself further by attempting, and failing, to calculate the days. He simply knew that long before the sun came to save him, he would have withered away in the belly of the beast. "You shouldn't waste your time sitting up here," his mom said when she came in and found him watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass of his bedroom window. "I've got nothing better to do," Harvey said without looking around. "Well then, you can make yourself useful," his mom said. Harvey shuddered. Useful? That was another word for hard labor. He sprang up, marshaling his excuses. He hadn't done this, he hadn't done that, but it was too late. "You can start by tidying up this room," his mom said. "But don't sit wishing the days away, honey. Life's too short." "But that's a good boy." And then with that, she left him to it, Muttering to himself, he stared around the room. It wasn't even untidy. There were one or two games scattered around, a couple of drawers open, a few clothes hanging out. It looked just fine. I am 10, he said to himself, having no brothers and sisters. He talked to himself a good deal. I mean, it's not like I'm a kid. I don't have to tidy up just because she says so. It's boring. He wasn't just muttering now. He was talking out loud. I want to. He went to the mirror and quizzed it. What do I want? The straw-haired, snub-nosed, brown-eyed boy he saw before him shook his head. I don't know what I want, he said. I just know if I'll die if I don't have some fun. I will die. I'll die. As he spoke, the window rattled. A gust of wind blew hard against it, then a second, then a third, and even though Harvey didn't remember the window being so much as an inch ajar, it was suddenly thrown open. Cold rain spattered his face. Half closing his eyes, he crossed to the window and fumbled to slam it, making sure that the latch was in place this time. The wind had started his lamp moving, and when he turned back, the whole room seemed to be swinging around. One moment, the light was blazing in his eyes. The next, it was flooding the opposite wall. But in between the blaze and the flood, it lit the middle of his room, and standing there, shaking the rain off his hat, was a stranger. He looked harmless enough. He was no more than 6 inches taller than Harvey, his frame scrawny, his skin distinctly yellowish in color. He was wearing a fancy suit, a pair of spectacles, and a lavish smile. Who are you? Harvey demanded, wondering how he could get past this interloper to the door. Don't be nervous, the man replied, teasing off one of his suede gloves, taking Harvey's hand and shaking it. My name's Rictus. You are Harvey Swick, aren't you? Yes. I thought for a moment I'd got the wrong house. Harvey couldn't take his eyes off Rictus's grin. It was wide enough to shame a shark with 2 perfect rows of gleaming teeth. Rictus took off his spectacles, pulled a handkerchief from the pocket of his waterlogged jacket, and then started to mop off the raindrops. Either he or the handkerchief gave off an odor that was far from fragrant. The smell, in truth, was flatulent. You've got questions, I can see that, Rictus said to Harvey. Yeah, ask away. I've got nothing to hide. Well, how did you get in, for one thing? Through the window, of course. It's a long way up from the street. Not if you're flying. Flying? Of course. How else was I going to get around in a foul night like this? It was either that or a rowboat. We short folk gotta watch out when it's raining this hard. One wrong step and you're swimming. He peered at Harvey quizzically. Do you swim? In the summer sometimes, Harvey replied, wanting to get back to the business of flying. But Rictus took the conversation in another direction entirely. On nights like this, he said, doesn't it seem like there'll never be another summer? It sure does, said Harvey. You know, I heard you sighing a mile off, and I said to myself, there's a kid who needs a vacation. He consulted his watch. If you've got the time, that is. The time? For a trip, boy, for a trip. You need an adventure, young Swick, somewhere out of this world. How'd you hear me sighing when you were a mile away? Harvey wanted to know. Why should you care? I heard you, that's all that matters. Is it magic of some kind? Maybe. Why won't you tell me? Rictus gave Harvey a beady stare. I think you're too inquisitive for your own good, that's why, he said, his smile decaying a little. If you don't want help, that's fine by me. He made a move toward the window. The wind was still gusting against the glass, as though eager to come back in and carry its passenger away. Wait, Harvey said. Okay, readers, hopefully you have some jots down about the setting, about the time and place that this story, The Thief of Always, is taking place. And you have done some really important work as readers, especially as fantasy novel readers. And the settings in fantasy books are really complicated, and it's super important for you to do the work we just did at the very start of the story by looking at the cover, reading the back blurb, and reading the beginning of the story to get an idea of the setting before you get deeper into the book. And so you are going to now have the opportunity to do a little quick check. And this is on Microsoft Forms. Your teacher will post this somewhere for you to complete. And you're going to take the jots that you just did during our lesson, and you're going to use them to answer the questions in the form about the setting and about who seems to have power. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all soon. Bye.